Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. Today, I welcome Gary to the show. We're going to be talking about self-confidence, shifting our perspective, and many, many more things. So just a quick introduction to Gary, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So Gary works with entrepreneurs, athletes, businesses, busy parents, and everyone in between. He shares insights into a completely different way of thinking, leading to a life-changing shift in perspective. This has a transformational effect on all areas of life, including personal fulfillment, increasing levels of performance, and business success. So welcome to the show today, Gary. Glad to have you on. I know we've been chatting, got a lot in common, and it's always great to network with like-minded individuals. So, thanks for reaching out. So Gary, what I be really interesting to hear from my perspective, but also for the listener's perspective, potentially as well, is talking about like a change in perspective for you, helping people like do this and finding what's right for them. Was there something in your life that made you have a significant shift? And what's really got you into this kind of work? Because we're really interested to hear a little bit about your story and background into this.
Yeah, so first of all, Johnny, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it was a complete shift in perspective as a result of hitting desperation point. So for myself, my story, it starts in childhood, where just so many of these things begin. And this is what I've learned as a coach. And they set the pattern, they set the perspective that you have. And for me, it started with not feeling accepted in the world of school and being bullied for my appearance. So that started a perspective of inadequacy. I'm not enough was the lens that I was looking through. And what normally happens is once we have a perspective, we try to find a way to survive that. So for me, it was, how can I be good enough? Yeah, how can I be perfect? And because I'm looking through that lens of inadequacy, every area of my life needed to be perfect. I've got to have all of the money, the right career, the number one business, all of these things that we're told makes us successful. And that was my life of just constantly forcing my way through, trying to be perfect, trying to look good, trying to make all of the money. And it was exhausting. And for me, it led to being in a hotel business of all things, but just actually starting to achieve some of the things that I thought would make me happy, that would make me enough, only to find that I was achieving them, but still wasn't happy. And that for me just broke me, because I'd pushed myself as hard as I could, and I collapsed on my office floor. And thoughts were then turning to wanting to leave the world, serious thoughts about that. And those thoughts I hadn't actually experienced since like being a child, like 11 years old, where everything it got really, really dark. And, in both instances, there was no place to go. I felt hopeless, helpless. So it was that moment of desperation that became then the inspiration, because it's there where I found personal growth. And we're having a little chat, but that's where, the traditional route in, you discover Tony Robbins, who's everywhere. And it was actually just starting to listen to Tony, and then found different mentors, where I started to discover this world of personal growth that I had no idea existed, right? If I knew it existed, I would have definitely been intrigued into that. So yeah, that's kind of my story, quick fire with a lot of details left out, but it was hitting that rock bottom stage to not knowing what to do anymore. That was the opening into a whole new world. And for that, I'm just so grateful.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and well, thanks for sharing your story. And ultimately it sounded like there was a point where a lot of it was driven by or you were saying like driven from the I'm not enough, and then the perfection came in, and trying to prove to the world. And I definitely experienced that in my own life so many times, just not feeling good enough. And for me personally, it's linked to I'm not lovable deeper. I don't know if that was true for you, or that was a theme, but that definitely came up for me. And I know many people I've coached previously and or even talked to now, it comes up from them, and they just even sometimes admit that they feel like not good enough. So yeah, it's it can I found from my experience as well, it can shape, and it's awesome that, although obviously not obviously great that you're in the desperation phase, that that's again relatable, but you know you got into this whole personal growth world, and you're able to see different views, different perspectives as well. One thing that I just wanted to ask about really was how the idea of how your perspective sometimes could impact your reality. Now, we were talking about one of our mentors, Peter Sage, who's I'm very fortunate to have had on the podcast previously as well, and I'm learning a lot from him. And he's obviously a big fan of this and the way you look at the world, and he creates all these different views. But yeah, just to be useful to hear about how changing your perspective like maybe altered your reality a little bit.
Absolutely. So yeah, as it relates to perception, for me, perception creates reality. Yeah. So we all look out to the world and we think that's how the world is. But in essence, the world is, you could say, neutral, but we are imprinting our meaning onto the world. So when I really got that, it was actually through a quote by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and I'll probably butcher this, but he said, "When you change the way that you look at things, the way things look change." And I got
That's correct. And that I've heard it anyway.
Yeah. Right. And basically he's talking about this difference between content and context. Right. And context is our perspective. And for me, perspective is it generates, of course, our reality, but it's out of which our thoughts, feelings, and therefore our actions arise. So if you can discover your perspective, the world that you're living in, and learn to see, is that actually a truth or just what you've learned? Because if you can alter your perspective, everything externally changes. So this is how your inner world does in fact lead your outer world. But most people are believing that, oh, because that out there happened, I feel X, Y, and Z inside. It's just not true. The truth of that is because I'm perceiving that circumstance through my own personal lens, now I'm feeling how I feel, right? And when that really sinks in for somebody, they step into the world of power. Because if you're living outer to inner, you're powerless. It's just a powerless place to stand, because then you're kind of giving your emotional set over to whoever or whatever happens. So perspective for me is like that deepest level of code. It's subconscious. People aren't kind of walking around knowing what world they're in. That's just normal for them, right? But I would assert that's normal, but it's not natural, right? So as we start to investigate our own perspective, and we can see where that got developed, especially in the world of like suffering, whether that's the anxieties or depressions, that all gets started through a perspective that was built in our history. So for me, perspective is everything. And if you can learn to not only question that perspective, but shatter the lens, then your whole world can change, because you can build whatever perspective that you want. So you can link it into identity. You get like a lot of people coaching about identity, change the labels after I am. And that's great. But for me, that's still a little bit surface level, because you haven't rectified, you haven't investigated, you haven't let go of the old version of you first, right? Because you're going from, let's say, I am, and all of those limited labels that follow it. If you go straight into, no, I'm amazing, like I'm powerful, like I'm a rock star, whatever, I'm a freaking magician, whatever, right? The subconscious narrative in the back's going, no, you're not, no, you're not. And that's why like affirmations, they just don't work unless you've rectified the lie that I would say that you're limited in some way, right? So you shared before about like the not enoughness was leading to, therefore, let's say, a fear of not being loved.
Yeah.
And I agree, right? It's because for human beings, we just fundamentally want to be loved and accepted. We just want to belong. So for me, the way that that cascades is that on a human level, we want to be enough. So we do all we can so that we are loved and accepted and wanted. But the reason for that is because what happens if you're not? And that then fires the fear of isolation, yeah, of not being wanted. And that for a human being is one of the primal fears, because if you're isolated, if you're alone out in nature, well, that's a death threat. So it's so amazing when you start to see that the ego, the persona, the identity, whatever label that you want to give it, yeah, its construct from my perspective, and we're talking about perspective, is in some form of like, I'm not enough, inadequacy. Yeah, I don't have enough, lack. And then some form of insecurity. So I'm not safe, I'm not going to be okay. Right. So when we start to discover that those perspectives, they're just a part of being human, but they're not actually a truth, well, then everything shifts. Because, you know, in the absence of your fears and your concerns, everything's possible. And that's one of my favorite questions. I actually had it up on my Instagram, I think yesterday. But it's like, you know, if in the absence of all your fears and your concerns, if I was to ask you, Johnny, that question, what would you say? What becomes like available for Johnny if there's no fears, no concerns?
Is that a question to me right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, like if without the fears and concern, it's really interesting. We're talking about Hawkins. It's just like for me, it's like pure love. It's like pure freedom and being able to experience that because like the fears often stop me from experiencing that, the great connections of people and life as well. If that's who I feel like I am in essence. And when I've done a lot of deeper work, like somatic work and kind of like retreat work, even in like, particularly the last year, it's really brought me back to that when I've been able to actually go, okay, that's what's been hidden in my body, like deep down. And that's who I feel I am. And I feel like even learning from Hawkins, I think lots of us do have that love, that ability naturally, but all these things come in and can alter our perspective, like the fears from our experiences and things like that. So that's who I feel like I am at the core. And there is that love and the connection. It's just sometimes navigating it back, and it can be hard day to day, but it's about putting in the work for me.
Yeah, beautiful, right? And like you gave the perfect answer for what I was hoping you might say, which is freedom, right? A sense of love, a sense of power. Yeah. And for me, those are all the qualities of the deeper part of us, whether you want to call it consciousness, soul, whatever, right? It's in the absence of the I that we think that we are, that we get to that connectedness that you just spoke to. So when we start to actually discard all of these layers of what I'm not, what you're left with is just what you truly are. And I say it specifically so because it's more like a what rather than a who, right? It's a bit deep. But this is like, for me, where it gets so powerful, that the process of like growth and evolution is not by adding stuff to us, but exploring what's in the way. And it's the discarding, the letting go of, like, that's why in the absence of fear or concern, worry, you know, all of these things that are very human and we've learned and we've got all of the evidence for, right? But when you start to unpack it and unravel it with someone that can really listen, all that's left then is just like, I'm just free. And that's the perspective shift. That's the stepping into a whole new world, like looking through new eyes. And then, you know, when you're feeling free, when you're feeling powerful, when you're feeling love, well, then you can go do anything. And for me, that's the game that I'm into, right? It's almost the human being versus being human. And that's a massive distinction, right? So hopefully that made sense, but I loved your answer.
No, love that part of the conversation, and well, all the conversations. So yeah, we're kind of on the learning from the same books and things. So it's I love hearing about that. One thing I wanted to touch on a little bit, Gary, was this Well, for me, like what I've done when I've like drilled down on things, and again, like I never sit here and say I've figured out all the answers. I don't think any of us can sit here and say we figured out the answers, right? We're all a work in progress. There's going to be things that are going to come up. We're always working ourselves. But like for me, just like personally, when I've worked through, often when I'm like maybe like triggered from something, whether it was like, I don't know, a job loss, a breakup, someone said something to me, something like that. I often find when I'm diving deep into like these and going a bit deeper, I find in the past it's been something like I'm not enough or I'm love or not lovable. That's actually the root of it. Or and I was talking to someone about grief yesterday that I found like the kind of like mini sort of like grief events, and grief for me is not just about losing someone to death, but it can be other things. There's usually kind of a core moment that's kind of got it all. And I found like diving down deep into that's like really, really helpful for the individual. And this can be really hard, just like thinking about like perhaps when you've been in hard situations, because a lot of us, we're in the like we're talking now, I can't speak for you, but I'm feeling pretty good, been doing a lot of work on myself, exercising and all these kind of things. And it's okay, we're talking about stuff now, but for the individual, perhaps in that moment of, right, someone just really hurt their feelings, they've gone through like a certain loss, whatever that loss could mean, a person, a situation or something like that, and they're really feeling like life's against them, and it's just really hard to get out of that perspective. Like, have you got any sort of guidance from your own experience or working with people on perhaps how you can start changing perspective so that it works in your own interests, or whether there needs to be a certain process to work through, feel some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely, and a great question, right? And the first place I'd start with anyone that's truly a great coach from my perspective has mastered the art of just listening, really getting somebody's reality, right? And it's so first and foremost is love and compassion, as corny as that might sound, but that's where I start. And it's just like I get where you're at, right? Because otherwise, for that person, most people have never felt seen and heard. So to be actually revealing some of their deepest, darkest things that perhaps there's some guilt or shame about is first of all just a huge kind of evolutionary step for them. But there's no judgment. That's the place that I start from: love, compassion, no judgment. Because the thing is, most people are trying to get away from what they don't want. They're trying to avoid it, right? But the first place that to really start is with acceptance. And I'm not saying that it is how you want it, that it's great, that it's amazing, that we want it to stay that way. But no, it is what it is. I'm at where I'm at. Because from there, we can actually take a step forward, because otherwise we're in resistance to reality, right? So that's the very first step. And then once we get into acceptance, we can start to explore some of these things that people are saying that they believe to be true, but actually, when we shine a light on it, oftentimes is not, right? So the fact, if someone said to me, they said this to me and now I feel X, Y, and Z, it comes back to what I was saying before. That's just not true. And I would help them see that. It's based on your perspective of some form of perceived threat, that you are having an emotional reaction just based on your perception of that person, right? Because someone could say something to you and say something to me, and I could find it funny, yet for you, you're dying inside, right? But it's just words, right? So to be able to understand that is so powerful, because then we get to be able to see, oh, wait a minute, I got triggered by that. That for me is what I call the gift wrapped in shit, right? Because what that does, it's revelatory. It's showing me where I'm not free, where I can't be okay with circumstance in this moment. So it's got nothing to do with out there. It's got everything to do with us and ourselves, not from a place of like judgment of self, but actually from, oh, that's interesting. So now if something like triggers me inside, which fortunately is quite rare now, right? I get excited. I'm like, amazing. It's showing me a space where I get to find more freedom. Yeah, because if I know that my nature, yeah, is freedom, is power, is love, yeah, those are the essence. Then if I'm feeling something that's not that, then that's clearly an illusion that I'm oblivious to. It's subconscious. Where did that get started? Because it's through literally discovering that, seeing what you were talking about, you said as a grief, right? For me, I call it like a trauma, right? Or you could say you got hurt. Either way, it didn't get reconciled, it didn't get completed, and you just have carried it through into the present moment, and oftentimes are projecting it forward into the future as something to avoid, right? So where we get to find freedom is actually where we get triggered. And it's the question I get asked a lot. It's like what should I do? I'm just like, go live life. It will show you where you're not okay, where you can't maintain this inner sense of peace that's your natural state. And from there, we get to explore, okay, what's really going on right now? What's going on there? Like, where's that come from? Is it true?
Mm.
And Johnny, when people dissolve these events, when they process them from their history, from a new perspective, it literally melts away, because all of their beliefs about themselves, their inadequacies, their fears, they literally evaporate. And from there, it's just like, like you see their shoulders sink a couple of inches, they breathe for the first time in probably about 20-30 years, right? And for me, that's why I love doing what I do, because that's what's possible. So that's what I would share with people, that it's all possible, it's all available. It's just learning how to move through it.
I love the thing I kind of circled there that you said was freedom comes from, discovering your triggers. And I thought that was and being with them and actually seeing where we're being triggered.
They're the gift. They are the gift. And that's why I call it the gift wrapped in shit. I'm not sure if I can actually swear on here.
Yeah. No, fine.
Just keep me. But it's just, I bring a lot of lightheartedness to a lot of my coaching, because it helps break the ice and in these conversations too. But the reason why I call it that is because it doesn't feel good in the moment, right? We don't like to be triggered, right? For me, rather than it being out there or that circumstance shouldn't have happened, I'm just like, well, wait a minute. Like, who made me the master of the universe to say how it should be? Right. So when I get over myself and believing that I'm right in every circumstance, I get to explore, wait, this is actually showing me where I can't maintain my peace. I'm not okay with it. Right. And the moment we find okayness, or a better word, acceptance, because the other is resistance, right? I don't want it resistance. We have to be in stress. If we're in resistance to our reality, it's just, you can't get away from that. So that's why the remedy, the medicine, is acceptance for the resistance that's there. But most people don't know how to find acceptance. And that's where the shift in awareness helps up level to be able to bring that acceptance to the resistance. Hopefully that made sense. There was a lot of resistance, acceptance. But that's why it's like, when we find peace, acceptance for what is, it's not out there. It's just showing us where we're not okay. And that's just a gift, because we find literally more power, and it's actually an access tool to discover who we truly are.
Love it. It's it reminds me of something that came up in the call the other day with Peter. He asked someone who was talking about a family member that really upsets them, and then he was asking them, why did you choose them to be your family member? And it was like the classic.
Yeah, it's a different perspective, right? Like, if you hold it and it's a huge step for some people, it's a much deeper conversation. But what if you chose your parents, right? And that all the blame suddenly goes because you chose it. But that's more like an esoteric conversation, more of a spiritual one. It's like my favorite conversation. I go there oftentimes. I definitely go there in my coaching, because that's the ultimate perspective shifter, because you go to that deeper space, right? And the moment, whether it's you're reading like an Eckhart Tolle, he might call it like the watcher, the witness, something like that. Like, the moment you find the space and behind the perspective where you can observe these limiting patterns that you've developed, this persona that you think that you are, that actually is just a construct of language. when you discover that deeper space within you, which is more the esoteric conversation, that's almost like the platform from which you start to be able to make change. Because if you're not aware of that deeper space, and that's where, a lot of mindfulness comes in, like discover the space behind the thoughts. If you're not there, then you're gonna completely be involved in your subconscious patterns, right? And you're just running on autopilot, and most are for 95% of the day, and I used to be, right? It's just a part of being human. Our attention has been being drawn out, just due to the nature of our senses, right? So yeah, it's that's a deeper conversation, one I'm happy to go into, but I know you've got quite a few cool questions, so don't let me take us off course there.
No, I think yeah, it's definitely something I know that is probably a whole hour kind of conversation at least. We could go into that one, but yeah,
maybe a part two.
Part two, yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, Gary, like, to be honest, like, and following on that one, there's probably a lot more I'd like to cover. But yeah, like, I think some of the way you've shared some of your life, your experiences, how you've been working with people has been really, really valuable today. And I've been making plenty of notes myself. I always like to make notes and then kind of think, oh, okay, that's something he said. So really really valued what you shared today. As we kind of like wrap up today, is there like a final point that you'd like to share that maybe we've not covered, or something you'd like to re-emphasize? And also, there's a lot more you could share. Where could the listener find out more about you?
Yeah. So yeah, as it relates to, a point to share, probably if it was going to be in relation to, my story, it would just be that change is always possible. Yeah, there's always hope. And I just, my mission here is just to share some of the things that I've been blessed to learn. And I started off with real small goals as it relates to coaching, which was if I could share some of this stuff and it helps change one life, my life's work is complete. And I was blessed to get that done quite early. So I'm definitely on bonus time here, but it's, I just, for anyone that's feeling incredibly low, and it can be, depends when this comes out, we're doing it quite close to Christmas, that can bring quite a lot of like emotional heaviness to people, is that no matter how deep, however dark it gets, there's always a way out. And I have personal reference for that. So that would be the message I'd share with people, and to don't give up on yourself. So, and then as it relates to, where people can find me, really simple. I generally focus in two places. It's my website, which is garywaters.co.uk. And then Instagram is I am Gary Waters. So you can find me on there. I am on some other things, but I don't really, there's just too many of them to update. Yeah. So I just kind of stick to those two. That's where you're most likely going to get me if you want to learn a little bit more about what I have to share.
Brilliant. Yeah, be sure to link those up in the notes below. And we'll keep in touch on Instagram as well. So yeah, we'll link those in the show notes. So once again, Gary, a massive thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Johnny, and thank you for the gift that you are. All of this work is just so beneficial for so many. You're a true gift, you're a true light, and I just want to give you that reflection, and thank you for giving me the space and time to contribute in my own little way here.
I appreciate it, Gary. Thanks so much. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember, you are in control of your own self-esteem and confidence.